Hey everyone, if you're struggling with a wheel in Forza Motorsport, chances are good that you just need to adjust your settings. This game actually has pretty great wheel feedback across the board, but the stock settings on a lot of setups do not give that impression. So I'm going to start this video off by just giving you all a super quick-fire bullet point settings guide that I find works well, at least as a starting point, for the majority of wheelbases. And then we'll actually dive into the specifics of what each setting does and what you can adjust to increase or decrease different aspects of the wheel's feedback. So, for the lightning round, start by making sure you're on sim steering in the game's difficulty settings. Then head over to advanced input and scroll down to force feedback scale. And don't touch this until you're actually testing on track, but this is meant to be your overall feedback strength adjustment. This will vary depending on things like your wheel's torque and software settings, but should be set at 100 or lower. Mechanical and pneumatic trail are going to play a major role in your feedback feel. Mechanical trail should be set a bit lower on gear and belt-driven wheels, and often much higher on direct drive wheels. Pneumatic trail should be raised here on belt and gear wheels, but left stock on most direct drives. Road feel should be turned up in most cases to around 120 to 150 to bring out more curb, bump, and elevation feel. Load sensitivity should be left at or near 100 on belt and gear driven wheels, but can often be lowered to around 50 to 70 on direct drives. Wheel damping scale is a big one. Turn this way down. I find it to be great for all wheels at around 10 to 20, but you should err on the higher side of that with direct drives. And then you can drop centering spring all the way on direct drive wheels, but gear and belt driven wheels might feel better with this at around 10 to 20. Finally, for dynamic damper, you can leave this pretty high on belt and gear wheels, between 70 to 100, but we'll want to turn it down on direct drives to 50 or even lower. And that's all you need to touch. If you just wanted a quick primer, go ahead and try these settings out, and your wheel should already feel much better. But of course, we want it to feel perfect, and every wheelbase is different, so let's dive into each setting to discuss what they do and how to bring out more or less feeling where you want it. To speak briefly about sim versus normal steering, in almost all cases, if you want more accurate physics and feedback, simulation is of course the way to go. This will make cars feel more weighty and responsive. If you're having trouble maintaining control of the cars though, and find yourself spinning out maybe in quick transitions for example, normal steering does actually dampen the inertia physics of the car to help it feel a bit more planted and sharp. So you can give that a try, but again, I recommend sim steering always when using a wheel. Now over into advanced settings, we'll start again at the top now with vibration scale. This scales the feedback you get from things like tires chattering when over-rotated or during launches or heavy braking, and it also adjusts vibration from collisions. I haven't personally found any situations where this really needs to be turned down at all. So back to force feedback scale. This one is fairly self-explanatory, as it just scales the overall percentage of feedback strength you get from every type of feedback the game is sending to your base. It's like an overall volume dial. You generally don't want to bring this over 100% because that's likely to induce clipping, where your wheel's motor maxes out and stops providing any sort of meaningful dynamic feedback. This can often also be adjusted in your wheel's software on PC, so again, leave this at around 80 to 100% to start, and then adjust this one on track once you've got the rest of your feedback settings more dialed in. You can also adjust this on a per car basis through tuning if you want to adjust the strength of an individual car's feedback. For steering self-alignment, this setting kind of makes up for shortcomings between software-driven motor feedback and the actual mechanics of a real car, and it's sort of related to caster. This is another setting that is often best left right at 100. Too low and your car will start to drift a bit on straights, causing you to have to correct the steering too much, and too high can rob you of some control over the car. Alright, now back to mechanical trail, and again, this is a big one. If you're struggling with the feeling of understeer in the game, it's likely due to a bad mechanical trail setting. So to preface this, when you lose front grip in a car, you feel that through the wheel, where it'll feel lighter and pull less. You kind of feel the grip break away. This also relates heavily to caster feel and is really important feedback for the driver because it tells you how much you can turn the car before inducing understeer. So what mechanical trail does is adjust how much that feeling trails off, or how sharp it is. Lower settings lead to a feel of a sharper grip fall off, and higher settings will lead you to a smoother loss of traction feel. So in lower spec wheels, I found that the understeer feeling is often a bit too muted. So turning this down just a bit can help those wheelbases bring out a more pronounced understeer feel. But direct drive wheels don't usually have this problem, and instead the grip fall off will feel way too sharp. It can often feel like the cars just have no front grip and you're constantly understeering. But you might still notice that if you do turn the wheel more, you still get more turn in. So if you get that feeling from your wheel, turning this up heavily improves the understeer and corner grip feeling. I've been seeing people turn this to 150 or so on really strong wheels like the Moza R21. Mechanical trail is probably the biggest setting to dial in right, so you can get that locked into the corner feeling. And with that, let's now cover pneumatic trail, which is kind of similar, but also opposite to mechanical trail. Where mechanical trail relates to feedback from things like suspension arms, pneumatic trail relates more to feedback from your actual tire. Pneumatic trail is another setting that affects how you feel loss of front grip through understeer or heavy braking. However, here, lower settings will provide a smoother feeling, and higher settings will give you sharper feedback. So again, with budget wheels, it's often better to turn this up a bit to bring out more of that understeer and tire grip feel, but direct drive users are usually fine leaving this as is. Now for the road feel, this one again is fairly self-explanatory. It affects how strongly you feel things like bumps and surface imperfections in the track surface, as well as curbs. I find that Motorsport's curb feeling is pretty muted, so I prefer turning this up to between 130 to 150 so that I can actually feel when my tire is up on a curb. This does end up amplifying the actual road surface a bit more than I would like, but I think it's a small price to pay to have that extra curb feel. Alright, getting towards the bottom here, load sensitivity is another setting similar to road feel, but more related to things like elevation change, banking, and small dips or humps that cause the car to bounce. I like this setting higher, even just at max on belt and gear driven wheels to bring out more feeling there. But if you do set it too high, this seems to overpower other more important feedback like mechanical trail. So you might want to turn it down to between 50 to 70 if you notice that. Now, wheel damping is another very important setting. This is basically like a white noise dial to drown out all the dynamic feedback you get through your wheel. And 100 is full blast. This basically adds in a static resistance to the wheel's movement, and somewhat like centering spring, has nothing to do with the actual physics feedback from the car. So you'll want to turn this way down to help bring out all of the dynamic physics-based feedback through the wheel. 10 to 20 seems to be the sweet spot here, but this is another one, like with overall feedback scale, that's best tuned on the track. Where force feedback scale is kind of like the max volume, this setting is more of like the minimum volume. It's not the exact same as minimum force, but you can turn this up if the wheel feels too light under light load, but still spikes really high under any heavy load, or if you get any sort of oscillation. I would definitely not drop this to 0, especially on direct drive wheels that benefit from some damping, but you can go pretty low here on things like more entry-level Thrustmaster and Logitech setups. Up next is the centering spring, and this, in almost all cases, should be dropped to 0. Like with wheel damping, this just adds a static return to center feeling that again has nothing to do with the actual physics or feedback from the car. Sometimes it's nice to have this on a pretty low setting just to help understand better where center is on the wheel and to give a bit of a sort of static caster feeling, but I prefer this at 0 on all setups. And now we get to dynamic damper. If you have your wheel damping scale set low, this setting won't make much of a difference, as this basically just adjusts how dynamic that damping effect is. But if you don't have much of a damping effect anyway, this doesn't play a major role. Effectively, what this does is reduce the damping effect when you experience loss of grip, in order to amplify that loss of grip feeling. So again, I find this adjustment to be pretty minor if you follow the other settings in this guide, but you can use this to really fine-tune that tire sliding feeling. And now at the bottom here, we have steering sensitivity and linearity. These should by and large be left alone right at 50. Sensitivity adjusts the input steering ratio relative to the actual car's steering angle. Basically, this changes the steering ratio of the car. If you do want a tighter steering ratio across the board, this can be raised to make it so you have to turn your wheel less to reach full steering lock, but Motorsport does have per car steering lock, and I would strongly suggest doing any adjustments there or just in your wheel's software. Now, linearity adjusts the sensitivity curve, and again should really never be moved off 50, which is a perfectly linear response ratio. A higher setting here will make the wheel much more sensitive towards center, but less sensitive as you rotate the wheel further. And of course, the opposite is true if you turn this setting below 50. And then finally, leave gamepad steering filters off in all cases, unless you have a super budget wheel without force feedback. In that case, you can turn this on. And there you have it. Just to summarize again, your big settings for adjusting dynamic, physics-based feedback are the mechanical and pneumatic trail, which relate to corner grip and understeer feedback, as well as road feel and load sensitivity, which relate to the track surface feel and elevation. Use force feedback scale alongside wheel damping scale to help set maximum and sort of minimum force, and turn centering spring way down or off entirely. And that's pretty much all there is to it. I really hope this guide helped all of you bring out the best feedback that Motorsport can offer and get more enjoyment out of the game. Maybe even get a little bit faster with that improved feedback. Thanks for watching this, folks, and I'll see you in the next video.